Now, high drama is very similar to comedy. It's all a matter of...
Pull to open.
Pull to open!
Yes, and what do you do?
Do you not ride the ship of time? Does it not deceive the senses being larger within than without?
And I have an ace up my sleeve!
Do me a favour. Very funny. Geronimo!
Here come the drums!
So here it comes, the sound of drums. Here come the drums, here come the drums.
Hello, and welcome to Pull to Open, where we've given you a synthesizer version of the sound of drums. This is a very, very random order podcast where we go through the whole of Doctor Who story, history, and the TV show in completely random order. And my name is Chris Taylor.
My name's Pete Paschal, and Chris and I are a couple of guys, a couple of journalists, a couple of longtime fans of the show, really into it, whether it is a synthesized opening, a mysterious opening, a spacey, timey music opening, or whatever. We love all the openings.
Yeah, we're going to vary our sound of drums a little bit more often now. Speaking of
might
openings,
talk about openings more.
we might talk about openings more. Openings are very important to Doctor Who fans, and so are recaps. So a recap of what has happened previously on Pull to Open. 3 episodes ago, long ago, we were at Logopolis, and then we went Longopolis, long ago, where the Watcher then got in his TARDIS and took us to the Carnival of Monsters, where we escaped from the miniscope, and we took quite a while to arrive back on Earth in Spearhead from Space. We have now left the Pertwee era. The randomizer has not listened to our requests that we go to the new show again. It never does. We're trapped, people. We're trapped in the classic series. But we are close now because we are at season 26, serial 1, Battlefield, our very first Sylvester McCoy. Are you excited, Pete?
I'm super excited. McCoy. What can I say about McCoy? He's very
the
McCoy-y.
real McCoy.
And he's the real Scottish Doctor, right? The original.
The original, the
you
first.
Might say.
Some might say the best. I'm not sure who would say that, but we've
Well, he's
room
the best
for all
one
opinions.
who had the most question marks in his attire.
Definitely the most question marks. We'll get to the extra question marks and exactly how extra that is. But first, we are a podcast, not just 17 TikToks in a trench coat, and we get reviews and feedback and all sorts of things in our new segment that we call Pull to Open Feedback Loop.
Yes, here we are in the feedback loop, guys, and the first up, as always, in the loop are reviews, and with that is your obligatory reminder. Reviews are great. We enjoy them. We enjoy it when you leave them. And it's really great. It improves our visibility in the podcast app, particularly the Apple one, where most of the reviews, it's one of the only ones you can do reviews, but they really, really do help in that app because it's obviously super, super popular. So if you have a second, please pause the playback. Why not just open up the reviews part of the Pull to Open page and leave a couple of characters, leave a rating, write whatever you want, and we would be forever grateful. We'd also like to read it out on the show, which I will do in a second with one.
Absolutely. Just seriously, this is one of those things where, I know some of us who are Apple fans never use Safari except for when there's an Apple event. I feel like that this is the equivalent of that. You may not use the podcasts app, but if you're on an iPhone right now, just pull down your screen, search for podcasts, find us in podcasts, leave a review there, and you don't need to open the podcasts app again. You can go back to whatever it was you're previously using.
You don't even have to hunt down that folder on your iPhone that just says Apple crap. Which includes tips and maps and whatever. I kid Apple, of course.
Yeah. You just enter the letters P-O-D and podcast. You want me? You want me? You're ready for me? Finally! It's my moment in the sun. Yeah. Anyway.
It's one time. Speaking of moments in the sun, I have a moment in the sun for someone with the handle Thinking Fish, who left this review in Apple Podcasts. They reside in the United States of America, fellow American. And it goes like this. The title, 2 Whovians Who Chew Over Doctor Who. Hosts chat about random episodes over its 50-year history, defiantly aimed at Doctor Who fans who have some basic grounding in the show's legendary strewn history. However, you don't have to be a deep nerd to enjoy this podcast. It helps if you watch the episodes they talk about, but I've found that even a quick dive into YouTube search helps get an idea of the characters and plot of the show. Thank you, Thinking Fish. Exactly. I like this. This is obviously very matter of fact as reviews go, but I think I like tips on sort of how to listen to the show. And
it's also good to get that feedback, right? That we we have gone a little too specialist. We are kind of, deep nerdy fans. I do like that we're sort of slightly different levels of fandom. I think, Pete, you're kind of a bigger fan of the classic show. The differences in our fandom is emerging. A lot of stuff, like, for example, Battlefield, I'm watching for the first time. So I'm definitely more of a casual fan in that regard. But yeah, maybe we can be a bit more inclusive. I think we do strive to include the casual fans in everything we're saying. So that's not only a great 5-star review, but also good feedback on how we should talk, how much we should let people in. It is, of course, great that we do the TLDW summaries. I would argue that might be even better than going around on YouTube and finding a video about the show that we're watching. That's why we do that up front.
Yeah, I'd be curious for feedback, actually, to ask some direct feedback of some of our listeners. Even if you've left a review already, how do you like the TLDWs? Yeah. And what other segments of the show do you really look forward to? Feel free to suggest some. This is a democracy, sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
It's democracy with a final dictatorship call for other than the two of us, I guess.
It's a democracy run by a capricious randomizer who ignores all democratic requests.
Yes, whatever you suggest has to be signed off by the randomizer. That's it's just the randomizer. It's not us. It's them. Yep. They make the ultimate decision. Great stuff. Thanks again, Thinking Fish. And you could be Thinking Fish as well. All you have to do is just leave that review. Go ahead and do it. Could be an emoji, could be a few characters, or some more helpful instructions on how to listen. It'd be great.
Indeed. And one of the first 50 reviews will get the prize that we've been talking about in many previous podcasts. But yeah, let's move on, shall we? To YouTube.
That will happen someday. Yeah, YouTube. The phenomenon is growing. The phenomenon called Pull to Open, the YouTube page, which is, of course, at youtube.com/pull-to-open, /pull-to-open between those two things. We're continuing to upload season 2, so previous episodes that we hadn't had on YouTube. They're continuing there. So the Pyramid at the End of the World and The Lie to Land is one of the latest ones, as well as Inferno, Dark Water, Death in Heaven. It's been fun to sort of listen to where the podcast used to be and the sort of twists and turns. We sure did a lot of Capaldi in the early days. Yeah, that was when the randomizer was super in love with him.
The randomizer used to be so in love with the new show, and now it's fallen in love with the classic one. It's fascinating twists and turns that it's taking us on. Meanwhile, you're not just watching us on YouTube and Spotify, you're also watching us on TikTok. Yeah.
So TikTok is still alive. It's still happening, and we've sort of rebooted a little bit there after the hiatus, but still our most active network. We love engaging with you guys. We love all the comments, and we love to share, of course, clips of the show every week, several of them. So we also have a TikTok comment of the week, and this is about one of our Carnival of Monsters videos. So as you recall, we talked about when we did that podcast, the Doctor's activist past, when he petitioned the High Council of the Time Lords, apparently, to ban miniscopes throughout the cosmos.
Right.
And
so he claimed to Joe.
That was his story, right?
Yeah. And he's sticking to it.
I guess they actually did it. So I just found this an interesting comment because it's really like we like to explore these facets of the show and what they mean. And someone with the handle, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Syrian Ivy?
Syrian
Ivy says there's contrary opinions in all of Who on the Doctor's significance whilst he was on Gallifrey. Was he a political exile or a nobody who just left? Right? It kind of depends on what episode you're watching, but it's interesting to see what the point of the writer was trying to make by doing those things, and then how do you reconcile it with the rest of the history, which is super fun.
Gotta love a show that just sort of defiantly ignores one of the major questions at the center of like why did the Doctor run away? We've had different answers. I think the one in Heaven Sent was probably the best version of that, but the show is just sort of kind of, and it just kind of throws it out there, and you have the ability now, even in 2022, to think either the Doctor was some sort of exile, perhaps a political exile, or he was just a guy who just stole a Type 40 TARDIS because a random brunette told him to. Yeah, and
which
then,
of those do you prefer, Chris? What do you like?
I kind of like the mixture of both, right? That the Doctor discovers as he journeys that he can create a legend for himself. This is why the Doctor lies, is because he loves to reinvent his own history all the time, literally reinventing his face all the time, and his past can change too. Yes.
Yeah, I that's pretty cool. I like to sort of come down more on the side he was just kind of a nobody. And I know that's probably, if you look at the number of episodes this is explored, and certainly in the Whittaker era, it's been completely cast out. But it's probably still in the minority. And what was one of the aspects of The Deadly Assassin when we visited it that I really liked, that he wasn't really well known, that the people there, even when he got there, didn't really know who he was. And I just like the idea that, you know, the message that you can be just a nobody. It doesn't matter what your background is relatively. Yeah. It's the decisions you make and how you approach things, and the friends, you know, the journey, if you will, the friends you make along the way, et cetera, that really make you a legend. And I've always liked that message, which is a little bit like, you know, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Well, actually not ahead of myself, because it was one of our first podcasts, but one of the whole Timeless Child arc leaves me a little bit cold for that reason.
Hey, well, exactly. And we are going to get into the Timeless Child in talking about Battlefield, because we have to talk about the Doctor's past.
Right.
In all of this, but yeah, it does complicate
or
the
his future
Nobody thing. But one thing we can say is that the Doctor was probably not a political activist or a major one, because he's had so many opportunities to be Lord President of Gallifrey.
Right.
And
well, he was for a while.
He was. He's run away from it. He's run away from his President of the World duties. Like, he's just not a kind of stick-to-it kind of political guy. So, you know. He's the man who runs away in a box.
Exactly.
The man who forgets.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Speaking of forgetting, we should not forget the late, great Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah, so one of our TikTok followers, Austin, thank you, Austin Mason, reminded us of this in sometime in the last couple of weeks, and just left a comment around when it happened, because this is actually a few weeks ago now. R.I.P. Bernard Cribbins. And I know we're probably the latest, the Doctor Who podcast is getting this bit of news the latest, but I just didn't want it to completely get too far out that we didn't even acknowledge it. And, you know, he was obviously such a major part of the new series, playing, of course, Wilfred. Yeah. And but he also, like, it goes all the way back to the very beginning of Doctor Who as well,
and to the Cushing Doctor.
Yeah. And he was in the title is always a little weird. It's Doctor Who Daleks Invasion 2150. The Dalek one, the other one, the Dalek Invasion. That one. They were both Dalek ones.
Yeah, and he had the great idea to shoot the Dalek in the eye stalk with a paintball gun, and RTD was so enthused about that he put it in. You know, it's just a perfect example of what the show can do when it's not taking itself too seriously, when it can take advice from the mighty Bernard Cribbins, who I remember from, you know, we're going to talk today about Sylvester McCoy, and remembering him from other BBC children's shows. Bernard Cribbins was all over BBC children's shows. He was also all over a show called Jack and Nori, where you just told stories. Literally just famous actors reading books to screen, and it was absolutely captivating. So I will always think of that when I think of Bernard Cribbins.
He had such a comforting voice. I would totally, you know, just put YouTube videos of what you just described on repeat, and would do it every night.
Yeah,
I'll listen to it. That would be amazing.
the BBC is missing a trick, not launching its own sleep podcast where they just all broadcast all Jack and Ori's. It would be fantastic.
There it is.
Yeah.
Guys, go ahead and give us a call or, give us the check whenever you get that going.
Yep, RTD, call us. All right.
Cool. So there's not a lot of other new business. Obviously, Doctor Who is still on hold for a bit until the centenary special, which we still don't have a release date of, but is rumored to be sometime in October. Though there was a little bit of news about it, sort of quote unquote news, just today in the Radio Times, and I was just actually reading this right before we started taping. And it's not much in the way of news other than just saying that there's probably going to be more nostalgia and cameos than you would expect from the trailer, which of course we know Sophie Aldred and Janet Fielding are returning probably in a big way. There's probably going to be a lot more cameos from various people, either from New Who or Classic Who. And apparently Jodie Whittaker's Doctor is going to wear some stuff from the old Doctors, perhaps. That might Can't wait to see how she rocks a stick of celery on her lip.
The Doctor cosplaying the Doctor is just such a great idea. I love the idea of a Doctor convention that is just staffed and containing different regenerations of the Doctor, all dressed as each other.
I'm sure someone's done this, but someone must have done like the I guess Uber Doctor or whatever, like something from everyone, whether it's the scarf, the celery, the question mark umbrella, and just throw them all together and maybe sew like a few different coats together. Everything from like Tennant's long coat to a Pertwee cape, and just throw it all together and just kind of like you're kind of this patchwork quilt of a Doctor. I think that.
And the Colin Baker section of that patchwork quilt is just a patchwork quilt within a patchwork quilt.
Yeah, maybe that's ultimately what the Sixth Doctor's coat was. That's what his outfit was. He was just trying to get everything together.
He was, the Sixth Doctor just went absolutely balmy. He was doing that thing late at night that cosplayers do, stitching the costume together, and he just had a little episode, as it were, and that was the result. Yeah, terrible cosplay attempt.
Yes, that's the show has some history of that, I think.
So is it time?
Guys. Yeah, I think it's time. I think we got to quit stalling. And even though I'd like to keep going on all the cosplay, we've got to get to what we're here to talk about, which is, of course, Battlefield. And I'm throwing myself on the altar here, Chris, by just going into this because I kind of want to get it over with.
We do start every show, every review of the random story with TLDW. Now, I know that if you guys are watching this on YouTube, and a lot of you are, increasing number of you are, you may have seen last week's TLDW. I appear to be looking down, and in fact I am. I'm sort of looking down at my keyboard and kind of trying to recollect the story, and for some reason there's a focal point in my keyboard. That might look like I'm looking at notes. We are not. We close all our windows. Like, you can always see this moment where Pete's screen goes kind of a little bit darker when he's doing TLDW. He's closing all his tabs. He doesn't even want a stray mention of any of the characters to disturb it, because we take our TLDW seriously, people. We know that you don't have a lot of time to watch Doctor Who. You don't have as much time as you would like to watch Doctor Who. You may not remember Battlefield. You may not have seen Battlefield, but we are going to summarize Battlefield for you in 2 minutes, or rather Peter's.
And to be clear, what I was saying, I want to get it over with. It's this portion of the podcast, the TLDW, not the. I'm excited to talk about a lot of this story and what the implications of it are, but
it's a nice grounding.
Oh my! This one is like. Yeah. Oh my! I've just been honestly dreading this all week because I know it was my turn, and I'm sorry. Like TLDW is all on a good week, it's a mess. Like, I'm starting with a mess here to work with, and I'm just gonna like create some other kind of mess to have it make sense.
Spin this mess into gold, my friend. You're going to make a silk purse of this Sauzier of a story.
Okay, so I've closed all my windows here.
Yeah, we give each other 30 seconds per classic Who episode of 30 minutes. So you have a whole 2 minutes for this 4-parter that is called Battlefield. And are you ready, sir?
Oh my god. I guess can I say something other than yes? Should I just take a minute to like
we can just pause it right here. We can talk about something else.
Straight to the destroyer.
Yeah, we just talk about gardening, which is a clue.
Let's get it right in.
All right.
Let's just do it, man. This is going to be fun.
All right, Battlefield summarized in 2 minutes or less, starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, the Brigadier is retired and he's buying a plant with his wife. And while this is happening, there's a distress call being sent out, apparently by a sword that's under a lake somewhere, possibly in a spaceship. The doctor detects it and is coming to see what's going on. And coincidentally or not, there's a nuclear missile that's sort of in this area that's been sort of run off the road. And there's sort of an issue going on with that. But at the same time, this apparently the sword has attracted these sort of people, these knights that are coming from space, not just from space. They're actually from another dimension. And there's one good one and a bunch of bad ones, and they start to fight. And then the doctor comes in and to the unit guys and says, "I'm the doctor." And you're like, who is this guy? And then one guy remembers him from the 70s, and they call the Brigadier, who was just buying things, even though there's a new Brigadier. Her name's Bambera, but he was buying things with his wife, and he comes out of retirement because the doctor's involved. And so what happens is these knights start to fight, and there's a big sort of, one of them gets knocked out. It's the good knight. They befriend them with the doctor and Ace and everybody, and they eventually track the sword under the lake, which is sending out this distress call. They realize that the doctor actually was involved. A future incarnation of him was involved and sent the distress call out, brought everyone together. The Morgaine, who is the queen of the bad knights, actually comes from across the dimensions and decides to take control because she really wants this sword for some reason. But to get it, she'll do anything, including summon the destroyer, who is this blue creature who could lay waste to everything. But the Brigadier, because unit is actually on the job now, has silver bullets and shoots the destroyer, and it blows up, even though all the other knights and the unit guys kill each other. But well, that's happened. That leaves the nuclear missile vulnerable. Morgaine tries to take control of it, destroy the world, but the doctor talks her out of it, and thus disarms the nuke. Everybody sort of goes home and has a cute moment where the doctor makes supper.
The doctor is about to make supper. Yes, I think we can call that a success. You got to the final scene.
You know what I totally forgot, and I just realized this right at the end. I never mentioned the doctor's Merlin. And it's Arthurian legend, even though it's kind of all implied.
Yes, it is implied that the Doctor is Merlin, has been Merlin. I think to echo the show, we're gonna like frustratingly be put that way later in the podcast. Like we're just gonna keep your interest, put a pin in that. The Doctor being Merlin, perhaps one of the most important things ever said in the entire show. Just okay, he's Merlin, right? But also, I would say one thing that it perhaps is important, but the story is such a mess. Who even knows? That we don't even mention is that Morgaine is talked out of launching the nuclear missile because she learns that Arthur is dead.
Yes, right. Yeah,
and that's the final thing that the Doctor finds is that Arthur is kind of just dust.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the moment I think that saves the show in a lot of ways. One, it's really dramatic. It's one of the Doctor's best speeches, honestly. Like, I think this episode's a bit underrated, and McCoy himself underrated for that scene alone, almost. But it's actually like the whole time you're kind of thinking like, Morgaine, who is this woman? What is she doing? Like, what does she care? What is her motive? And you kind of get it. You finally get it there. And it's like, oh, she's a ruler. She's kind of interested in conquest. She wants people to bow to her. But ultimately, she was defining herself by her relationship with Arthur. Yeah. And when she realized he's not there, she loses it. She loses her motivation completely. She just doesn't want to do anything.
And it suddenly humanizes her. Now, she should have been humanized by the fact that she gave sight to the wife of the publican. Is at the Gore Crow Hotel. There was a little subplot there. Yeah, the Gore Crow Hotel, by the way, where the Doctor said, "What could possibly go wrong in the Gore Crow Hotel?"
I gotta say, they have really nice signage at the Gore Crow Hotel, and that's kind of one of those things about this episode. I mean, we can talk about the budget and the production values, but it's not a lived universe in the same way that Star Wars is, right? You kind of
Yeah.
like if you're going to put on these fake signs, like give them a little wear.
Yeah.
If you're, it just looks like it was just put up for the show.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just so many things wrong. Where do we start? Where do we even start? But I will just to finish that thought. Morgaine, have you ever read The Mists of Avalon?
I have not.
I highly recommend it. It's sort of a feminist take on the Arthurian legend. Really interesting retelling of the story. Does focus a lot on Morgaine and her love for Arthur, which in Battlefield we only discover at the end. But they were like half brother and half sister, and supposedly got it on maybe in some versions of the legend, and it just it brings up a lot of issues. We maybe should have heard about that earlier than when she's deciding whether or not to launch a nuclear missile. Might have had some kind of tension in that moment there when she hears that he's dead. But yeah, only revealing that she loved him after he dies is a kind of weird story choice. I'll just say that.
Well, I gotta say, like I think it helps as a come together moment. I mean, you certainly get the sense that he's very, very important to her, and that she is, in fact, almost relishing this return to their conflict, because he's clearly been out of action for centuries at this point, right? And it's never clear to me. Again, there's a lot of things that are not clear to me. I mean, a lot. I'm just happy I got through that plot summary. But one of the things is, I've never really understand why this happens now and hundreds of years later. And all I can figure is this is when future Dr. Merlin decided to have it happen. And maybe it's the bootstrap paradox. And like, well, I know my previous self, this happens in the late 90s or whenever this is supposed to be. I'll just set this to go off in the late 90s then. And it's like, fair enough. I mean, I guess the bootstrap back in 1989 was probably not even an idea, or it was if it was an idea, it wasn't called that at that point.
It was very niche.
Yeah,
it was very, very niche.
But I mean, that's all I can figure. Like, why is this happening now? And what has everyone been up to for hundreds of years? I mean, we know Arthur has just been wasting away, but Morgaine in her own dimension. I've been reading up on the background of this episode. I guess there's theories that she was forced out by that final battle, right? Because they talk about a final battle with Arthur where he died. And I guess the doctor, starts the rumor that he didn't really die and he's coming back, but brings his ship and his sword to our dimension. And then Morgaine is sort of forced off world in her native dimension and sort of becomes this more of a niche player for a long time and rules other planets.
Yeah, you could make almost any change to Battlefield and actually make it a more interesting version of the story, because there's so much buried potential. But I want to bring us all the way back to the beginning, because this is our first look at Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. And
here in the podcast.
Here on the podcast, yes. Here in our
this is his last season.
This is his last season.
But yes.
His third and final season. I forgot he had 3. Like, that's how little I know about McCoy's Doctor. I thought
they were short.
They were short seasons. And this is the last one. And I feel like I should declare our biases right at the start. I was watching for all of Colin Baker's tenure. When Time and the Rani came out, and you have that awful regeneration scene at the start because Colin Baker didn't participate, and suddenly it's Sylvester McCoy in a Colin Baker wig, so obviously such a bad regeneration. I kind of rage quit Doctor Who at that point. And occasionally I would see McCoy episodes, like I sort of convinced myself that I'd grown out of it. Like it was, I was a teenager. It's like Doctor Who wasn't cool anymore. And occasionally I would come back. Cool? It was ever cool. It was a lot cooler in the 70s and to a lesser extent the 80s. But certainly by 1989 it was not cool at all. I would occasionally see the Sylvester McCoy intro at the time in 1989, and I would wince. At the time, I want this to be clear, because it is a CGI intro. Obviously, looking back at it now, the CGI has not aged well. But I remember at the time using a very British word in my mind to describe what this intro was and what the whole vibe of McCoy's Doctor was, which is naff. It was just a bit naff. It was a bit
naff.
A bit naff. I suppose the modern American equivalent would be to say it's very mid. It's mid.
Say meh. Mid?
No, I've gone beyond meh. Mid. M-I-D.
Wow.
Mid. This is what the kids say now. It's like it's just very middling. It's just It's like barely a step up from basic.
It's definitely 1.0 CGI. Like you're 100% right. It's I respect the choice in doing something totally different. Like we're throwing out the Visu Starfield that served so well in the early 80s, and they wanted to give McCoy something very distinctive. And the wink, as much as it's kind of annoying, it does kind of set a tone, which I don't know. You could argue with the tone. It definitely sets a tone. I would also argue with the tone. I don't think you necessarily want that. I certainly actually don't think you want that in McCoy's last season.
Right.
And I'm not thinking specifically of this story, but I do think he got a little more cerebral. And I think that was generally a good thing. So I don't hate the intro. I actually, the intro, if I hated intro, we definitely got to do a thing on intros at some point.
Yep.
I didn't like the Colin Baker one, mostly because he didn't get his own, right? Like he basically got a ripped off version of Peter Davison, even when they redid the music.
Even technically, Peter Davison didn't get his own either, because it was Tom Baker's final season where they changed it, right? And they just put Peter Davison's face over Baker's face. But at least that, it had a propulsiveness to it. You're moving forward through the starfield, just moving forward through the time stream in, the famous Tom Baker intro sequence. I don't want to linger too long on here, but like McCoy's face with the wink, it still makes me cringe every time. Also the fact that like you see his hair is kind of brill cream back. And it's like, okay, well, is that what we're going to see? Like, but no, we get the stupid hat. I have issues with McCoy. I really want to say right out, I was watching this with my wife, and Sylvester McCoy is her doctor. He's the first doctor. And she's, very kind of sensitive to McCoy criticism. So I want to say right up front, I love Sylvester McCoy. I think he's a great actor. He was, as I mentioned, all over British television. I particularly remember him from, there's a kids' TV show called Jigsaw. And it was sort of a midweek, middle of the day kind of show for kids with lots of sort of, fun stuff and curious problems, and it was a bit educational in that. McCoy was fantastic on it. He was so memorable. He's got such a twinkle and a spark to him. He's a great actor. I didn't ever really see him as the Doctor. I'm sorry. I just didn't. I couldn't. There was something about it. It wasn't just the bad handover from Colin Baker. I did finally at the start of the TV movie, I was like, okay, Sylvester McCoy now feels like the Doctor. But maybe it was just that all of his stories were shot mostly on video, which just kind of looks a bit naff. They make weird directorial choices about how to shoot him and how to light him. Have always somehow make him look small, smaller than he is. And like with Troughton was also a small guy, but maybe it's that he had more of a booming, commanding presence than McCoy does. McCoy is more sort of a wizened, twinkling kind of actor. But also they shoot him from above instead of below. Like, you have to make the Doctor look big, right? The Doctor does have to command a scene. And McCoy, they just don't, like, you don't see those sparkling eyes of his. There's not enough close-ups. It just, he's not shot from below. He's wearing all of the question marks, which is just so extra. So extra. Like 2 question marks on the collars, I get it. An entire sweater. Okay, now we're just being silly. JNT, now we're just being silly.
I think what you're zeroing in on is kind of the mixed messaging that McCoy's Doctor started with. And he, the intro was unfortunately never changed. And I think it works for his first story, which is you get a lot of sort of comedic performance when his regeneration scene. We'll talk about timing and running when we get there, but it's funny how different, even starting in the next episode, the rest of his run ends up being. And by this point in his run, I think he's really commanding the role, and this Doctor's coming into his own. Unfortunately, you still have those beginning hints and they're carried over mostly with costume, with the question mark umbrella, the question mark jumper. It's like he still looks just a bit silly. I don't mind that he's not shot from below and that he's not that tall. I actually like the idea that he's underestimated, and I think that sort of leans into it. Plus, he has Ace for most of his run. So
he has an ace up his sleeve.
yeah, it's not quite Batman and Robin. It's like almost like Robin and Robin in a sense. Like Robin 1 and Robin 2. They're both just these quirky people that show up, and they're kind of tiny, yet they both can really, walk into something and kick ass in their own ways. So
And just blow stuff up.
Yeah, my issue, I guess, and I think this is actually the exception. So I don't want to go too far into this general commentary about Sylvester McCoy's run, but I do think a lot of his shows end up sort of working better as novels than shows. And this is an exception. I think Battlefield is actually a good television episode, but it works because I think there's a lot of action, a lot of interesting characters, great performances, but there's a lot of like intellectual stuff going on. And here it's at least relatively simple, with the destroyer being kind of a metaphor for nuclear devastation, and some other points they're sort of trying to make about comparisons to Arthurian legend. So I think Battlefield generally works as a TV episode, as much as it's complete nonsense. But McCoy, it's funny. Like McCoy's arguably like the Doctor who had the longest run in a sense, because he kind of came in at 87, and then I guess McGann took over technically in 96, but I think in most people's minds, McCoy was the Doctor until there was a new show. Yeah. And if you're a hardcore fan, sure, yeah, you had McGann stuff, you had the audios and novels and stuff, but he had like there was the New Adventures went on for so long with Sylvester McCoy, right? They were just seemed so reluctant to regenerate it, which of course they couldn't, right? Because it would be just not be non-canonical if they did.
He definitely had a great second life, as Paul McGann did, as the Doctor in audio adventures, in the novels especially. I mean, I still really want to read Longbarrow. That one that sort of really dives deep into the Doctor's myth, led to this myth of there being an Andrew Cartmel master plan. And
you think it's a myth?
We'll get to that, but just sort of a lot of Who historians have kind of poured cold water on this notion that there was a master plan beyond just sort of like, we want the Doctor to be a bit darker, we want to start
introduce a little more mystery, at
a different past,
but they didn't really have like an end goal, and it just sort of
I mean, how it manifests here is the console's a bit dark at the start.
Well, that's a good transition into a chat about budget.
Yes.
And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that is the only shot of the interior of the TARDIS for the entire season.
It is, because it's the last one.
Yeah, they didn't have any money for the set or just sets in general, and they just threw something together that looked relatively cheap. But going further, I mean, the unfortunate thing about the last few years of Doctor Who, I mean, the budget was cut and cut and cut. And this is obviously a lot to do with sort of issues of politics at the BBC and the famous stuff with Michael Grade and whatever. But here, it always has bothered me in this episode in particular, but most of McCoy's sort of final season, everything just looks and feels so cheap. It looks like they're doing everything on one take. There's not really like beam effects even in the weapons, which would have looked, but it's like they're not even trying to some extent, at least with the budget. Like, I'm not saying like the creative people weren't up to the task. They were. The actors are all giving it their all, 100%. But there's clearly like, I don't know if they even have anything even approaching a stunt choreographer, because all that sword fighting, it just looks like it's so stage. Like it's just pantomiming it, and like
it's sub Ren Fair, isn't it? It's below what you would expect if you went to a Ren Fair. This sword fighting. There's a great moment where the Doctor walks through the middle of a sword fight, just parts their swords, walks through the middle of them, and it's sort of a meta commentary on how bad the sword fighting is. Now, if they just stuck to that throughout, unfortunately, a large part of Battlefield depends on, what I'm sure they thought were going to be big battle scenes, and lots of sword fighting, and on it can't decide if it's serious or not.
Yes, exactly. And there's the worst. If there's like a bunch of contenders for worst Doctor Who effect in this one. And then I remember we've done Talons of Wang Chiang. Okay, like
yeah, we know from effects.
Yeah. So where the Knights land is pretty bad. Seeing those sort of, I don't know what they are, coffins, meteors, whatever, that looks really bad. But when Anselin, the good knight, gets thrown by the explosion through the roof, it's not just bad. It seems like it's consciously bad, and it was funny to watch this with the commentary. So they had a group of people, including Sophie Aldred, Baron Aaronovitch, who was the writer, Andrew Cartmel, and others commentating. Ben Aaronovitch was like, "Oh my God, no! Do we have to watch this scene?" Like basically, like, "Oh, here it comes!" And you could feel him squint and wince as they show it, and so. I don't think they were going for humorous, right? And yet it comes across that way. He's just sort of thrown through the roof in this really goofy way. There's even like a sound effect, like it's just.
There's so many moments like that where it's just like, were you trying to create the worst Doctor Who that you could do? And for me, like I don't know if this is just sort of like confirmation bias, right? We know now that it's the last season of the classic series. But to me, the overarching feeling I got watching Battlefield, and again, I was trying to stay neutral, was watching with Sylvester McCoy fan. The overarching sense I got was of a show slowly committing suicide. Right from the intro, which just seems so like even just put a few more stars in, guys. I just don't know why. It just seems so spare and so basic. Right through to stuff like they literally helicopter the Brigadier into the plot. Literally helicopter him in. That's how he emerges in the story, in a helicopter. But also, like, they stick him in that helicopter, they stick him out there, and he's looking down on London in the sunrise and talking about how beautiful it is. The helicopter pilot's talking about how you've seen one helipad, you've seen them all. Like, this should show that there's a famous Samuel Johnson phrase: if a man is tired of London, he's tired of life. This is a show that's literally tired of London, right? They have this conversation about like, London's all the same, bureaucracy, it doesn't.
Well, they also just don't even show stock footage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they don't even either they couldn't afford it or whatever. Just thought it would be weird. But it is like this thing where the actors are really trying to sell what they're seeing, and I guess you're kind of buying it. But it's I don't know. To me, that just felt like padding, and I would have loved to see more just explanations on like what the hell is going on.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, and I think it's interesting we came here from Spearhead from Space, which shows what you can do on a limited budget. You can use actors twice as scary body doubles with the Autons, right? That's one example of, if you have a bit of imagination, here's what you can do on zero budget. I think it seems clear, and it's a very bizarre thing when we finally see the Destroyer in episode 4. He's actually really good.
Yeah.
The costume is good. It's Buffy. It's a very Buffy demon, basically, right?
Very much is. And honestly, like, it's funny, it came, well, I guess a decade plus before this episode of Buffy, but he reminded me a lot of the Judge. I don't know if you know Buffy, but in season 2, they summon this blue creature who's going to destroy the world and, needs to be freed and stuff. It's like, I got to think, it's funny, like how Buffy and Doctor Who, I think, have inspired each other. I don't know if Joss Whedon maybe was thinking of this particular episode, but yeah, it's very much a Buffy creature. I mean, the lips move. They definitely, like, some money definitely stuck to the Destroyer.
Yeah, they had a saliva budget. I mean, that's where the money went. It's all literally pouring out of the Destroyer's mouth. Yeah.
But I liked the comparison you made to Spearhead from Space, because I'll sort of go back to one of the things I mentioned about that one, because that was all done in film. I feel like that has aged much better than this episode and a lot of late Doctor Who, because at some point, and I believe it was right around when McCoy took over, they stopped doing film altogether, and everything was just done on video, even the location work, which is technologically, it's fine. I just feel like the frame rate of video, and this might just be a taste thing, but I just think it adds a layer of cheapness. It makes it look like you're watching the news or something that was on the news as opposed to something on film.
Very, very true. And for it all to go in the destroyer at the end in the final episode is just a very, very weird choice. And by the way, did you also see the scene where the destroyer kind of rips his shirt open?
Right.
At one point
Yeah.
when he's
I'm out
freed.
of this chainmail. I guess that was silver too. I thought the chains were just silver. It was very weird. Maybe he's just he's doing a Hulk Hogan moment, right?
It's a very convenient thing so the Brigadier can shoot him, but it also looks very, very 80s, very MTV hair metal music video. Like, the destroyers. Like, I wanted Whitesnake to kick in at that point.
Yeah.
Here I go again. Like, it's just
destroyer's good.
He's got the
He's big
hair.
and scary. And I don't mean this as a criticism because I didn't notice at the time. But does he ever actually do anything? Like, what does he do?
Supposedly he eats worlds. I don't know how that works.
I just it would have been good to see some, whether it's kind of like they show the reality bomb in the new series of Journey's End, just vaporize a bunch of people all at once. Would have been good to see him do something of a certain scale and horror that was crazy, and then you realize, oh my god, this is going to be bad. And someone has to stop this guy. We kind of just know from his voice and how he looks. I guess you have to, but
he's going to make Ace and her new friend, whose name I'm forgetting, who was originally going to be called Ty.
I forget her name too. I'm gonna have to look it up. But she was great. I thought she was
great.
fun.
But he was going to make them his handmaidens in hell, which is kind of that cliffhanger at the end of episode 3. Where Jean Marsh's Morgaine has that great line, handmaidens in hell. Xiaoling. Yeah, which we should mention up front. Xiaoling, obviously, this is a show that's trying to be more diverse. Mm-hmm. It's trying to enter the 90s, and it kind of does so in this really creaky, wince-inducing fashion. And one of the things it does include now on BritBox a sensitivity warning for episode 3, where Ace, under the influence of Morgaine, deploys a slur, a racial slur commonly used towards Asian people. 2 of them actually, at the end of that episode, and it sort of works because they hug afterwards. They were like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," but like it's so weird to hear like that level of racism come out of Ace's mouth, that it just sort of stops you dead in your tracks.
It does a little bit, and it's good that there's the cover of like she's kind of under mind control. So yeah, it's
you should feel like Xiaoying should have had a an opportunity to say something back. Like she just stands there and takes these racial slurs. But yeah,
well,
bizarre.
And I think you could, if they had added a scene in episode 4 where they really make up for that specifically, like Ace says something like really remorseful. Yeah. I think that it still would still work, and you could still leave it in. In other words, I mean, I think you still need the sort of trigger warning because that's just what you do today. But I think for just morally in the story, I think you could use an extra layer there. So
it's also
just
weird
a little bit that it didn't age well.
It's also a weird choice to make the Brigadier, even if he's joking, just a little bit more sexist than he was in Spearhead from Space. Right? We've just come straight from that. So the Brigadier Bambera, this Brigadier Bambera, the Brigadier says to the helicopter pilot, "Good chap, is he?"
I mean, that's pretty mild, as it's just an assumption, and particularly someone of the Brigadier's age, it's
this is why the random journey that we're on is interesting, right? We just come from Spearhead from Space, where the Brigadier is just, he had no issue with hiring Liz Shaw, with sort of overtly drawing attention to her gender, right? Mm-hmm. In Spearhead from Space, it is in fact the bluff old Major General who's a little bit sexist, who's like, "Brigadier, you didn't tell me you had such a charming pretty thing working in your lab, So we've just gone from the Brigadier being ahead of the times to him being behind the times with this sort of weird sexist joke about Bambera.
Well, but he
So
doesn't
just
make
a
the
lot of
joke.
weird
It's just a
choices.
joke in the script. Like in other words, it's less a character thing here in this case, is sort of a show thing. So the thing is about Bambera and the Brigadier, I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about Bambera is kind of where I'm trying to go, just because I feel like while most of the guest cast is good, and I think she's fine, I don't think the show quite knows what to do with her other than she's a woman and then she gets to kind of be badass. And maybe that's enough. But you kind of almost, when there's two Brigadiers, they're never really, they're not on screen much together, and there's never like a who's in charge moment, which I feel like is a bit of a missed opportunity.
Totally.
Like I feel like you kind of want there to be almost like an official passing of the torch or unofficial passing of the torch, where yes, we all love the Brigadier, we want to see him have that heroic scene at the end and all that stuff, but I do also do want to, I want to like Bambera, like I wanted to see her. And I do in a few scenes, but I don't think she ever has a defining moment. And ultimately, she ends up apparently giving the launch codes at the end, which is a bit of a unfortunate moment for her. And I think they should have done that differently. I think whether it's either it's not her or there's some way to make it a little more sympathetic, because I did sort of leave that hanging. Like, wait a minute, how did they get that out of her? Because she knows it's the end of the world if she gives it.
Right. It's such a weird choice, and she's mostly sort of half falling for Anselin throughout this, which would be kind of cool and edgy if the show had actually had the guts to go there at this point. But it doesn't. I was glad to learn. By the way, this may be another reason why the randomizer brought us here, because I think the randomizer is sponsored by Big Finish. Because there is a Brigadier Bambera box set,
indeed,
that was just released this year.
Well, I'd be excited to listen, just because I kind of want to see what they do with the character, because I feel like there's potential here, but very little of it is tapped.
Yes. And speaking of Brigadier-based potential, I really wanted to see more Doris. Brigadier's
Doris
wife,
is great. She's memorable.
She's only in a few scenes in this. Basically doing that "do you have to go, darling" kind of thing, and then getting to go off in Bessie at the end with all the girls for, I guess, a girls' day out in Bessie. What did you think of that scene right at the end? All the single ladies are off. Well, okay, not single ladies, but they're all off in Bessie, and it just it seems like a really patronizing kind of scene to me, but
It's cute. I like the cute ending. The boys girls thing, a little bit, but I can't talk about that scene. First of all, one thing about Doris, I have to feel for Doris and the actress, because man, those mom jeans, those are some pretty bad mom jeans that she has on. Not good, not flattering. What is does not what would Captain Jack say? It's doing nothing for your butt there, Doris.
Doris.
Anyway, sorry.
Really should be working at Doris,
right? But I can't talk about that sort of cute final scene without talking about the climax, which is to say the Brigadier's big heroic moment, which I think and this is sort of, I don't think there was an earlier draft, as far as I understand, where they killed the Brigadier, but it was definitely Ben Aaronovitch, when he started writing the episode, intended to do that.
Yeah.
And when he got to the scene, he couldn't do it. And he basically told Cartmel, I can't do it. And they were all happy, like, no, go ahead, leave him alive. But I think ultimately it's because the overall tone of this, as much as it does get serious here and there with the nuclear speech and maybe a couple of other moments of real peril with Morgaine, it's lighthearted. And do you kill off the Brigadier in this, what's essentially kind of a fun romp? I don't think you do. And I think he got to that scene and was like, no, don't do it. And then, because if they kill the Brigadier, it's a completely different ending, right? It's a completely different denouement. It's just tragic, and everyone sort of goes their separate ways. But I like this for the story. Now I'm gonna reverse myself again, just so you're ready. I'm going to say I would have liked them to kill the Brigadier in other words, I'd rather they sort of change the tone of the story, do a fewer things, make it a little more serious, and then kill the Brigadier, because I do think that's what that character deserves. I do think, even though Nick Courtney's gone on to do big finishes, he did the Sarah Jane Adventures, and I'm really grateful that he did all that. But I do think there was an opportunity here to give the character a really great death scene and a really great send off, and they didn't quite deliver. And I'm glad, given the story they made the choice they did. But I would have liked to see something even more epic with a final end of the Brigadier.
Yeah,
I talked a lot there. What did you think about?
I think I'm going to agree tentatively with both of your conclusions there, but I and also have thoughts on both sides. First of all, I'm glad it happened the way it did, because I think the reveal of the Brigadier's death in the Wedding of River Song is one of those moments in the new series that always catches at your throat, and it's just like, we've seen closing time on our random adventure, and we know that the Doctor's sort of in this mode of going to see old friends, and he wants to have one last adventure with the Brigadier, because why wouldn't he? Because he always does, and then he can't, because the Brigadier's gone, because Nicholas Courtney's gone, and not a dry eye in the house at that moment. Beautiful piece of television. That said, the fact that they were going to kill him off and could not is, I think, a symptom of a wider disease that is evident in Doctor Who at this time. It's the show that is slowly committing suicide. I think when you've got it being written by fans like Aaronovitch, like Cartmel, who cannot do something like cannot kill the Brigadier, like, to make good art, a good drama, you have to be able to kill off characters that you love, right? You have to be able to kill your darlings. It really, Obi-Wan Kenobi was not going to die in the original draft of Star Wars, and they did kill him off, and it makes the story pop, because suddenly he's dead, he's in Luke's head, what's going on, right? It brings some weight to the story, and they have no weight in this story whatsoever. So making it the Brigadier's last stand, especially when that's sort of foreshadowed by this whole thing with Doris, where you think it's going to be he just returns at the end, like he always does. That would have been huge. It would have brought some weight to Battlefield, and I don't know, if the show had been more conscious about the end approaching, they might have gone for that more somber version, and paradoxically might have actually saved the show in the process.
Yeah, and the great thing about Doctor Who, and this was not as much of a thing in sci-fi in the past, but certainly Stephen Moffat has used this. Death isn't always the end, and especially particularly if your show features time travel. So, if you did so, like, again, you don't want to do this too much, because then it cheapens things, and we talked about that with Clara and everything. But you're the reluctant. There's less reluctance today to do things like that. I think maybe possibly for the wrong reasons, but if as you talked about Star Wars and deaths, and there have been some not so great deaths in Star Wars too, and bad choices, and it's you can rate your way out of it. You can reverse it. You can go forward in different ways. I mean, it just adds to the mythology, and the fact that the Brigadier never quite had that warrior's death that we wanted him to have. It's kind of unfortunate.
And it was going to happen with him calling in an airstrike, I believe. He was actually going to die in that airstrike, which would be, it seems fitting for the Brigadier, who spent half his Doctor Who career calling in airstrikes. But it's
he also gets one of the best Brigadier lines, at least, which is "Get off my world." I mean, and I got to say, like, there is so much good writing here. Like, there's clever dialogue and clever scenes around that dialogue, kind of throughout. I mean, just a few of them. Like, I really like it when Ace comes out of the lake and just hands the sword over, and it's like, "Here, you be King of England."
How could you not?
Funny.
I mean, were you hearing echoes at that point of Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
A little bit, yeah.
Watery tarts lying around in lakes, not the basis for a system of government. I said I was king or something because some moistened bint lobbed a scimitar at me. Like, they're almost using that exact dialogue without irony. How can you do that in 1989? more than 10 years after Holy Grail has sort of entered the consciousness of every school child watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's little bits. I mean, honestly, we think about RTD and Moffat as being sort of these masters of dialogue, and they are. But just looking at the stuff here, where the Doctor pulls out all those coins, and there's like a wind up toy, and someone just picks it up. And it's like, wait, that's a very valuable piece of currency. On some
I
planet
love
somewhere.
that. It is in fact a Zoid, which was a British toy.
Oh, I remember the Zoids.
Yeah.
Also in Canada.
Oh yeah.
And the bit where they unearth the tube under the lake, and I forget what it says. It says open here or something. And the guy says, "What does it say that in?" My handwriting.
Yeah, that was a cool
Nice.
moment that could have been handled better. There's a great moment where Anselin says to the Doctor, he's like, "Dost thou not travel through time? Is their box not deceiving to the sight by being bigger on the inside?" Like, really, there are some nice lines buried in this, but they are buried is the problem.
Well, not only nice lines, that's such a great moment because it happens still I think it's episode 2, and it's just like, we know you, and just like, well, wait a minute. And then your instant assumption is like, oh, there's some untelevised adventure, but then the Doctor says, never met him before in my life. I've no idea, and so it's pretty kind of incredible. Doctor Who hasn't done this until this point, where it does a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure thing, where it's his future self that's kind of gotten him into all this trouble.
Yep,
and that's just a very cool idea.
It is incredibly cool. Is it time to talk about Merlin?
I think it's time to talk about Merlin. It's time.
It's time for Chris's History Corner, or Chris's Myth Corner. We talk about Merlin. Yeah, so obviously the influence here in the idea of making the Doctor Merlin, you have to think about T.H. White's The Once a Future King, right? Which introduced the notion, played around with the Arthurian legend, as it has been played around with throughout the ages. There is one line of the historical King Arthur. Everything else is myth and legend to serve the needs of the time. But T.H. White was the first guy to introduce this notion that Merlin is actually literally living his life backwards from the 1930s, where I think he's an Oxford Don, to the 12th century. Right, so now we look at that with our modern Doctor Who eyes, and we definitely see a sort of echoes of River Song's timeline being lived back pretty much backwards, right? We might think of Benjamin Button or something like that, but that was an association with Merlin. I think that's what they were trying to get at with the Doctor. Like, the Doctor should be living some of his life out of order, and this would be a great example for that. The Doctor's a great fit for Merlin. But oh my God, do they underexplore that notion in this? Like, yes, there's so much more going on, but like, it really should be much more exciting than it is, and it definitely made me think of The Timeless Child in that sense.
Yeah,
which can tie in as an explanation for why the Doctor may still not remember being Merlin. Right? Maybe it is even post Jodie. Maybe it's something that RTD has thought about already. Maybe it's something we're going to get a reference to.
Could it be pre-Hartnell?
Could be. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Then why would he leave notes to himself? I guess it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I mean, as far as we know, the Doctor now might have infinite regenerations, right? So he could do, like, because it seems like he spends a lot of time in this other dimension for some reason at some point in his future, and there's like, he's fighting with the Britons in that time and in this world, and they're fighting Morgaine, and there's final battles and lots of elaborate things. What is this dimension? Why is it important? How does magic work there? How does their magic still work in our universe when they come sideways in time or whatever? Obviously enough reference to Inferno. Who knows? Never got explored. Yes. And
so there is a short story called One Fateful Night. It was one of the short trips starring Paul McGann, and it kind of is a prequel / sequel to this.
Oh, nice.
Obviously not canon because it's just a short story. But the Doctor encounters another Time Lord who's calling himself Merlin, and calls himself Merlin in the process. So it's very interesting, knotty, thorny, timey-wimey stuff going on there, and it's just one example of what they could have explored with this.
Right. Yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting, like the choices they make in the new series, and so obviously Chibnall did what he wanted to do. He ended up, whether it was inspired by it or not, tying into the Brain of Morbius stuff and
Mm.
expanding on that. A future showrunner, whether it's RTD or someone else, could easily key in on Battlefield and be like, you know what? I've got some ideas here. And, it's not like Arthurian legend has lacked exploration, but
Mm.
it would give an audience a touchstone and, potentially make it uh, feel even more epic by really leading into that. So
Yeah,
I
totally.
think, there's
It's,
definitely something on a ball on the court here someone can pick up.
yeah, I want to give Ben Aaronovitch, if that's how I pronounce his name, some credit. Like, he was trying to make a political point here that is really dark and not necessarily seen outside of Britain, because the part of the essential nature of the Arthurian legend is Arthur is going to come back.
Right.
He's the sleeping king. When in Britain's greatest, darkest hour of need, he'll be back. And here, Arthur is dust.
Yeah.
He's dead. He is gone. Like, that is the ultimate message. Wow. If that had been explored more deeply in any sense, that would have been very interesting and very relevant, I think, for post-Brexit Britain. You have a lot of people who dream of, the old empire, or restoring Britain's place on the world stage. Like this, I would love to see this repeated and explored further. Arthur's dead, people. He's not coming back. The old Britain's not coming back. Like that,
Yeah.
it just gets so buried here again.
Yeah. I like it is a little bit literally buried.
Literally buried.
But I mean, I like how it's used here. At least there's probably more to do. But the idea that we thought he was alive, we thought this was all going to happen again, it doesn't, and therefore nothing means anything. At least for the people who were obsessed about it, the people who define their lives this way, and it's basically Morgaine and to her people, like it's all over. And I gotta say though, like what in the world is the doctor thinking that Unit can hold her? Like this is another thing where I don't get what happens to her. Like they lock her up along with Mordred. We never hear from them again. But wait a minute, she's like magic, and she can shoot lightning bolts out of her fingers and take down helicopters. Like, how could they ever have a prison that holds this woman?
It's so bizarre. And the doctor just sort of walks out, leaving her in the nuclear control room at the end. Like, well, she's not going to suddenly change her mind again. He walks out with the keys, but is that going to stop her?
I mean, she needed to. She's not all powerful in the sense that she needed the codes and whatever to launch it, but it is she's powerful enough, and she doesn't die. This is I don't know. It's there probably is some story somewhere, but it's crying out for a sequel of some kind. Which again, maybe that's part of this whole thing of the future Doctor and etc. And what does future Morgaine do?
So I'm curious. We always have the segment of the show where Pete, you tell us what it was like to watch this story with your kids. I'm curious about whether this made them more or less interested in Arthurian legend.
Oh, that's actually a good question. I don't know about that. I think my son would be more interested because he's more the history buff of the two of them. But I will say they both really liked it.
Oh.
They were both really into Battlefield. There's 2 thumbs up for my kids, which I think, again, sort of indicates this story still works, even though it's super cheap, right? Even though it's kind of nonsense. There's enough coolness going on, and there's enough things that sort of tickle the mind, and even sort of visually in some places, particularly with the Destroyer, that I think that it just really worked for them.
It is interesting, isn't it? We come to this with sort of the cynical weight of being Who fans, right? Whovians who know that this is the last season, and me in particular, I'm looking for signs of a show committing suicide and all of this stuff. But it is like when you watch it when you're a kid, and I think this is true with Doctor Who in general, especially classic Who. Like disjointed plots don't necessarily matter; they're just a starting place for your imagination.
It's definitely doing way too much. There are not nearly enough explanations, but I also wouldn't want to slow it down. Like, this is one of the more dynamic stories that Sylvester McCoy has. And there's enough crowd pleasing stuff in here that I'm into it. Plus, Sophie Aldred is great. I mean, she's just always great, but like, she's got a lot of good lines. She gets a lot of action. That whole bit in the circle, the dialogue notwithstanding, I think is just inspired. Honestly, like, I like the little exchange she has with Morgaine, where it's not that like I have to believe this thing works. You do,
Yes.
like, and then because of that, you can't touch us. That was really awesome.
Yeah, and does she get the first Geronimo in Doctor Who?
Yeah, that was awesome. That is really cool. Where she just screams Geronimo. I think when she goes into like the vortex or whatever.
Yeah.
Which again is one of those things. Where are they? Is this the other dimension? Is this some other place castle she has just lying around here? Is it? I don't know. Who cares?
And
There's a big
their special
blue monster.
effect for walking into the vortex is that the actors literally spin around.
Yeah. Oh my.
Yeah.
You can get one of those little playground thingies where they could actually spin them or whatever. I don't. Yeah. It's very. Put them on skates or something. Anyway,
it's a tough scene. We should also mention, like, there is another unit dating controversy here. Actually, given we've sort of mentioned the unit dating controversy in the past, which really all stems from the Pyramids of Mars, right? And Sarah Jane saying that she's from 1980, which kind of messed up with a chronology where it was clearly unit was in the 70s before that. A lot of reasons.
Well, except for the invasion. We could get in. We'll get into it someday.
Right. We'll get into it someday. So that's the old unit dating controversy. They seem to want to deliberately start a new one by having this set a few years in Ace's future. So,
yeah,
assuming Ace is contemporary, that means 1991. And so, yeah.
Well, Ace, I guess, she would be from 1987, right? Because isn't that when Dragonfire was, when that was broadcast?
I guess, but then this is 1989, so it's exactly contemporary. Yes, so, they didn't think through that, did they?
Well, they said a few years. So I think what Ben Aaronovitch is the impossible task he's trying to do is balance both when unit was supposed to be, or at least what he thought it was supposed to be, and the real world where he could kind of mess around with a few things chronology wise to put it, I don't know, somewhere in the future. I don't know if it necessarily had to be in the future.
Yeah, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean,
what
is different?
If you really wanted to get it, if you really wanted to respect that the unit was supposed to be in the 1980s, and you have an older brigadier who is retired and even retired from his retired job. So he's like not only retired from the military, he's retired from teaching.
Yeah.
You kind of have to put it in the 90s and probably the later 90s. So he kind of settled this at some point and just said it's 1997. But I think they say lemonade's £5 or something at some point at the pub.
Lemonade and a glass of water in this little out of the way pub in the Gorkrow Hotel is £5. That would not be £5 even now in 2022.
Yeah.
So that was weird. There's also a king.
Maybe the lemonade market was just a little crazy in 97. We don't know.
The Brigadier mentions there being a king at one point. So we assume the Queen was supposed to have died or abdicated.
Ben was underestimating the Queen's health by a long margin there. Presumably he's thinking that Charles would have taken over by then.
Yes, but there's an even bigger glaring mistake in how you represent the 1990s, which is that this was early 1989. This was before the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? And we're still, I think we see a Russian soldier with a hammer and sickle, And
right. Well, here's the thing I thought was really cool, which again, you're dead on in that it's anachronistic and problematic because it doesn't match our timeline, but. Unit is in the modern version. They're kind of, I see finally what they were always supposed to be, this international organization with troops from multiple places. I guess we take it to mean there's a Czech, someone from France, someone from Poland, at least the ones we see. So all that's great, Like, and the fact that Bambera's of African descent, all of that is awesome. Like, let's see a modern,
Yeah.
diverse unit.
She was supposed to be
Um,
Jamaican, by the way, and I believe Aaronovitch was horrified when the casting was made of a British woman from Manchester. Like,
oh,
I wouldn't have put these Jamaican. There was a few Jamaican words, a little patois thrown into a dialogue, so he was horrified by that.
yeah,
But yes,
interesting. But
but
yeah, I
yeah,
really like
the fact
how they
that
made unit. Yeah.
we've got this new, to go back to the 1989 thing, we've got this, the destroyer is sort of a metaphor for nuclear war,
Mhm.
right? But then we go from the metaphor to the actuality, right, of Morgaine being about
Right.
to launch a nuclear warhead. It gives the Doctor the opportunity for his speech of what's going to happen in the nuclear war, powerful speech. But again, it's sort of like, in the real world, nuclear tensions eased just months after this show came out. Actually, interestingly, months after Doctor Who goes off the air, the Cold War ends.
Right.
Is there a connection? Is there a connection here? Could the two not function without each other? I'm just going to throw that fan theory in there. But yeah,
Well, it's kind of funny because like Doctor Who has always had this weird future, not really future, it's even somewhat contemporary, but it started as a future vision of a world government, or at least of a much more influential and powerful United Nations.
Yes.
And that's sort of been consistent throughout, and UNIT is somewhat emblematic of that. So it is a little weird they're even having this, like that nuclear weapons keep coming up. I will say the message about nuclear devastation is coming a number of years late, and I'm
Yes.
glad they did it. I think every franchise who has these sort of global stakes needed to do something like this in the 80s. But
Right.
this is coming well after War Games, or even the day after,
Yeah.
or what have you.
Everyone should have stopped after Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Basically,
Right?
that should be it. Like, okay, if you haven't got your anti-nuclear polemic done now, we're done, guys. That was it. The time has been called.
Yeah, bold choice, Ben.
But I agree with you. It's nice to sort of make UNIT appear more international, but they do blunder it at several points. And
It's a little hammy,
not just
too.
the Bambera thing, but also the Brigadier at one point says to his helicopter pilot, "Do you speak Czechoslovak? Do you speak Czechoslovakian?" Now, if you know anything about the history of that country, you know that there is no such language. There is no such country.
Right.
Literally now, right? It was just two countries that were squeezed together after World War One. Two parts of the Austrian Empire, but it also, Czechoslovakian is not a language; it's Czech and it's Slovak, and it just, for the Brigadier to say that to is the pilot supposed to be Czech? Like, we don't even know what. And she says, "Only when I'm drunk, sir." Is that like a?
Oh no,
a
she's French, right? Because she's Laval.
Is she?
Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think so.
She just sort of I think she. I don't know if the actress was French, but yeah, and it kind of felt for her when she gets like vaporized. She's one of the few. Well, I guess there's a bunch of casualties later, which you don't really feel much because they're just no-name unit soldiers. But she gets like incinerated or something in the pub, which is kind of sad. It's kind of like one of the throwaway deaths that isn't so throwaway. So that works, but. Yeah, like generally, I think the unit, this could have been an interesting, like I say, passing of the torch to a new era of unit that I would have liked to see
French,
with the next Doctor. Like that would have been cool. As it turns out, we had to wait something like 20 years for that, and it ended up being Kate Stewart, and all the cool stuff they ended up doing with Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi, and now Whittaker. But better late than never.
Yeah, we finally got there, and via several other international organizations, a lot of stuff that should have been in UNIT's purview, like the missile launch and the Christmas invasion. Yeah.
All right. Is it time?
I think it's time to ask the 4 questions.
It's time, everyone, for the 4 questions to Doomsday. And the first one, as always, is why did the randomizer take us here? What do you think, Chris?
The Brigadier Bambera Big Finish connection. Just to get a little more somber for a moment, I mentioned last week my dad passed away recently. I was over for his funeral. Spearhead from Space was an interesting connection to him because Pertwee and Troughton were his doctors. This also gave me big, my dad in retirement in the garden vibes with the Brigadier. So I felt that
Yeah.
personal level of connection. Jean Marsh, we haven't talked about her much.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about her.
She was Sarah Kingdom, the shortest lived companion, but also she was very briefly John Pertwee's wife. So we go from a Pertwee episode to a Jean Marsh episode. There's a clear connection there, and Brigadier first as a series regular and Brigadier last.
Definitely
in the series.
Good connections there. I got to say, can't say enough about Jean Marsh in this episode. She is amazing. She chews the scenery perfectly, and honestly, her performance is. She's almost too good for this story. You're totally. Just like everyone's kind of like doing the best they can, and then suddenly the queen of everything comes in and like just blows everyone out of the water. And the gravitas she gives that performance, that character, is part of why this episode pulls it off. Like it pulls this rabbit out of the hat, like a good experience out of such a mess.
I will say that her crown is a bit much. It's a bit much, but it's so
memorable, I got to say. Like, but I to your point, I think there were times that they couldn't hold it together in terms of talking to her. Like when she's like ordering Bambera to give her the codes, like who's the actress who plays Bambera again? Her character's name is
yes, it is. Not Angela. No, it is Angela. We have two Angelas. It's Angela Bruce.
Yes, Angela Bruce. She just found it a hard time to like not crack up. Like it's hard to take her that seriously with that crown, but somehow, I don't know, she pulls it off. So
she also has the requisite for Who villains in the 70s and 80s: long fingernails.
Yes, of course.
The Talons of Morgaine could have been an alternate title.
I think that's a spinoff right there. It's a manicure episode. It's a reality show. It's Doctor Who reality show.
Love it.
So, but yeah, the Brigadier connection for sure. It wasn't his first appearance in Spearhead from Space, but it was kind of like the first episode of the modern unit. And what I really found a good contrast was that he sees the John Pertwee Doctor in Spearhead from Space, and he's like, who is this? I don't know this guy. That's not the Doctor.
Yes.
And then without even having met Sylvester McCoy's version, he just finds him all, I forget. I think it's smacked around at the bottom of the spaceship at the bottom of the lake. Yeah. And it's like, hello there. I forget what he says. You've done it again, Doctor? I forget. Or he just says, hello, Doctor. And he just knows it. You're the Doctor. Yeah. Come on. Maybe he hasn't even seen the question mark jumper yet.
I know. I love that. Maybe he's seen the umbrella off to one side. It's like, oh, who else could this be? I like the idea. So, first of all, background, Spearhead from Space, some fans are like, even in that, feel that the Brigadier doesn't display enough skepticism about the idea of the Doctor changing faces. Weirdly, and I'm not sure we got around to discussing this during Spearhead, that by the time we get to Planet of Spiders, the Brigadier is already over regenerations, and he's never actually seen one.
Right.
He says, well, here we go again. Like, here's another 30 seconds of my life I can't get back watching the Doctor regenerate. He's so jaded. Like, he's a regeneration hipster, and he didn't even see it last time. What the hell, Brigadier? But anyway, so by now...
Benson, get us some popcorn. On the double.
I love it. But now he's just like, any strange guy lying around at the bottom of a lake is probably the Doctor. Why not? But I really like the fan theory that just says that the Brigadier has seen so many regenerations of the Doctor, unlike almost any companion. Seen so many regenerations of the Doctor. Now he just sort of sees the essence of the Doctor within all of these regenerations. He's
kind of become part Time Lord. Yeah. He has the Time Lord ability to just kind of know who it is.
He just knows, like, something about the way he carries himself, something about, I don't know, the build. Yeah. You just sort of recognize people after years, even if they've changed it a lot. They're still
I love that because Exactly, and I think it's so true of characters who, and even races that interact with the Doctor over and over. I think one of the best lines that we'll get there again when we get there, but in Earthshock, the Cybermen are figuring out who the Doctor is in this scene, and the Cyber leaders, he's that guy. He's super arrogant, like that's got to be the Doctor. Like it's like
maybe it's one of the things. Maybe it's one of the things the unit has been working on, as well as like silver bullets and all of this upgraded tech. Like we've worked on a good Doctor detection device. Like we just know when you're the Doctor now. It's okay. You don't even need to convince us. It's all good. So I like that connection. Chaps. I like the fact that the Brigadier. Here's an interesting randomizer connection. Brigadier was wearing the beige jumpsuit last we saw him. Now he's wearing basically the uniform of the Major General, of the Colonel Blimp figure in Spearhead from Space.
Right.
So it's like you live long enough to become the Colonel Blimp that you used to poke fun at.
We all got to have goals. So let's move on to the second question. What if the evil plot had succeeded?
So the evil plot, I think, is fair to say that. Okay, well, I guess we could say Morgaine unleashes the Destroyer, in which case the entire world is ended and she goes back to the parallel dimension. But you could also say the evil plot is unleashing nuclear hell by launching the missile. First of all, do we know where the missile is pointed?
Oh, it's a fair point.
Is it pointed at Russia? One would assume.
Why wouldn't it be?
Right.
I mean, I guess it just would go to the last thing. I don't know. I don't know how nukes work, and it's probably a good thing. In that, is there some universal program? It wouldn't be a networked thing. It would be like you have these targets built in, and you just kind of pick one, and maybe there's a default sort of sequence to it.
Yeah, I guess just defaults to Moscow.
Yeah.
So that would unleash World War III,
right?
Unless, the show's got to be presuming that Gorbachev is still in charge of the Soviet Union. In fact, it was Yeltsin in charge of the Republic of Russia.
Right.
But you might consider that this would not actually launch World War III. That because tensions have eased off so much, Gorbachev would see one nuclear explosion as just maybe this was just a mistake. Like, why would America or Britain launch one of their missiles, just one of them?
So you might not have a completely devastated nuclear winter world. It's still a very wounded world. I mean, you kind of essentially have the reverse of, politically, the reverse of the sum of all fears.
Right.
So I don't know if you're familiar with that Tom Clancy one, but like it's where Baltimore gets nuked. Or it's a dirty bomb, but it's one of these things where a major American city gets nuked, and then it's a terrorist organization that's responsible, not the Soviet Union, not the Eastern Bloc. So they narrowly avert a nuclear exchange.
So it's what's interesting here is this ties in, again, maybe why the randomizer brought us here. It ties into our theory of last time we were talking about on what if the evil plot had succeeded, that many of these alien invasion of Britain plot lines cannot succeed because the rest of the world can just nuke Britain. I think we literally said that last week, right? And the same thing could happen here. Yeah. Gorbachev is like, excuse me, Mr. President, do you mind if I just throw one nuke back at Britain just to get them back? Because they clearly launched this, from weirdly from this out of the way place near a lake in a hotel.
Then what happens to Morgaine? I mean, I guess she goes back to her dimension, so she doesn't die in a fiery nuclear explosion.
But assuming it does trigger World War III,
okay,
then presumably wherever this lake is, it's not a natural place in Britain specifically. The Doctor's wrong in the name meaning High King. It refers to a particular High King. By the way, did you notice the signposts were in kilometers? That's something else that's supposed to have changed in the near future.
Oh, they're not?
We go from
miles
to kilometers. Usually miles, yeah.
Isn't the UK? Aren't you on the old System International?
It went to both for a while, but certainly since Brexit, we've veered back towards miles.
Oh, wow.
I
did not know that.
But it would still always be miles on signposts.
And in here.
But anyway, presumably where this lake is, like they're kind of safe. from the nuclear blasts. They're going to hit London. They're going to hit the major cities. In which case, this gets into a very, very dark story of, the Doctor trying to help Earth, this planet that he loves, from surviving a nuclear winter, basically.
Right.
Which could destroy the human race. And perhaps probably himself dying of radiation poisoning. Slowly turning into Paul McGann.
Right. He'd have to do it. Yeah.
And then you'd consider that basically the TV movie would be Paul McGann as Mad Max in this post-apocalyptic environment, which
wow, that'd be kind of cool. McGann
right?
in the leather jacket early.
Yes.
And he's got probably not the long hair. It's probably shaved head or something. It's probably like his look from Alien 3.
Yes, post-apocalyptic steampunk Paul McGann with the shaved head. I mean, I would watch the hell out of that TV movie.
Nice. I like it. I like it better than the Destroyer doing its thing. Which, by the way, does that ever what is? Does she only release the Destroyer to get the sword? Right? Like, was that the whole point of summoning the Destroyer? Like, she seems bent on destruction at the end, but I think again to the point of everything, like I think it's all just she's just raging because she wants to have this fight again with Arthur and to best him, and when she finds that she can't, it's just pointless. So all of this is essentially designed to just bring him out.
Yeah, retroactively, it's just the Arthur is her equivalent of the Master, wanting to always draw the Doctor out. Right, that's basically what's going on here, even though it's unclear. So yeah, I guess
I just feel like the Destroyer just comes in at one point to be all scary, and it's just because she wants the sword. Yeah,
right.
I don't know. Yeah,
but then it's not clear why she wants the sword, and Excalibur is really mistreated. All over
then there's
place.
the whole thing with the scabbard, where it's got a lot of attention early on, and then just stops mattering at all once it's off the wall and they have the sword. It's like the scabbard's just okay.
And the Doctor explicitly said,
fiddle, I guess. Literally second fiddle.
The scabbard is supposed to be more important than the sword, and there's no payoff to that. Really.
I just forgot, and Ben Aaronovitch is aware of that. That's like he knows it's a failure, but it's definitely a failure. Okay, moving on to third question to Doomsday. Where is the Clara splinter here? And I honestly have no idea. I could think like there's tons of plot holes to pave over, certainly. So it's kind of like pick your thing, but the main thing.
I would go for. I would go for Clara is the unit officer responsible for locking up Morgaine. And, because with all of her lifetime, she will have some experience on how to do this, how to keep her powers in check, right? We were saying, why are they just so casual and blasé about locking her up? Well, this may be it. Commander Clara is on the case.
Or
slightly off screen.
Yeah, or she deals with it maybe she's not in unit and just figures out like, oh, I'll put her in some kind of like banish her somehow, whether it's a time loop or some portal to some faraway planet or whatever. Like she can't stay on Earth because it's like then, well, it's all going to the whole thing's just going to start again in in a few months or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good. I was also thinking maybe she's an assistant to that archaeologist guy. And just making sure he really takes his time with that dig so that it happens to be just unearthed to that exact point where the Doctor can read his own handwriting and no further. And so sort of limiting his progress so he just doesn't go too deep. I think that's not bad.
By the way, I sort of, this isn't Where's the Clara Splinter, but you feel like River would have snuck in a letter of her own at that point.
Right?
P.S. See you soon, sweetie. That's not in my handwriting. What is that? Maybe she's just sort of interfacing between the parallel worlds. The one where Camelot is. Maybe she's a lady of Camelot.
That's not bad.
Yeah, kind of.
Maybe she slipped sideways in time.
Yeah.
And she got the knights into these weird sort of coffin things that go through space to land on Earth. I never understood that. Like, wait, are they from space? Are they from another dimension? If they're from another dimension, why are they coming from space? Maybe she just invented that whole magic / technology.
It's
We'll go with
so
that.
weird. Yes. By the way, About Time has a wonderful summary of this whole episode, which is just they do a version of this is the book About Time. They do a version of the song from Spamalot, the Camelot song. When Knights of the Round Table, dimensionally unstable is how it starts, which I think is just a wonderful couplet. But yeah,
Awesome. I'm gonna look that
okay,
up.
so maybe that's Clara's task, and then the final of the 4 questions.
Is this a Dalek or an
yes.
Ogron or a Viscount Banger, which is of course our rating system?
Yeah, I think we can rule out Viscount Banger for this one.
Yeah, definitely not.
I personally think this is a sad old Ogron, a shadow of its former self in retirement.
Aww.
And it's just sort of sitting off to one side, and it's slightly out of focus, and it's on video.
Okay, that's a little harsh. I thought this was a Dalek. It's kind of a wobbly Dalek, but honestly, watching it with my kids reminded me how enjoyable it is because they were super into it, and I got into it, and I gained more of an appreciation. I think I used to get hung up on Battlefield's cheapness, and it is a cheap episode, no question, in a cheap era of Doctor Who, but it is super fun. There's great dialogue. It doesn't work really, like it doesn't as a story. It kind of leaves you thinking a lot of questions, and did that even make any sense? But I think it also leaves you with the sense like, wow, that was super fun. And that last little bit where it's, just the cute scene where the girls go off, you just think, okay, yeah, that was fun. That was a good time.
Yeah.
I would definitely come back and visit this estate with the Brigadier at some point in the future.
It's not as bad as it could have been. It's not the worst Ogron we've ever encountered or ever will encounter. I will throw in one sort of last thing, which shows it's kind of unintentional hilarity, but kind of shows that people were asleep at the wheel. You mentioned, drinking. This is a Dalek who's been drinking too many beers at the the Gore Crow
it's a
Hotel.
Dalek, exactly. It's a wobbly Dalek that had too many ales at the Gore Crow pub.
But that just reminds me of Morgaine restoring sight to the character's name is Elizabeth Rowlandson, the wife of the publican, and she suddenly is able to see again.
Mm-hmm.
Another subplot that's not really dealt with, and she looks around the room. She's like, I can see, and she gives her husband a hug. Doesn't look at him.
Right.
Would have been a nice bookend with Mordred kind of saying, oh, it is well that your lady cannot see you, sir. I make a jest at your ugliness, sir. So it would have been a nice bookend for her to actually look into his eyes at the end there. But, again, just one of a...
Would have been nice if they had the money for one more take. Just one more take. It's like, nope, got to move on. We got to start shooting Ghost Light tomorrow.
Just look at your husband like you've never seen him before. Yeah, that would have been good. All right, so we've done everything we can do on the battlefield of Battlefield.
We're leaving the battlefield. It's all there.
Leaving the battlefield. We left it all on the field. There's nothing left, and it's time to go random again. Pete, explain the randomizer to our new listeners.
Right. Well, now that we're done, we have to enter the TARDIS and activate the randomizer, which will take us to another random adventure in the television series Doctor Who. And we have 2 parts to the randomizer. First is the Pull to Open Codex, which is the comprehensive list of all the episodes of the television show Doctor Who, for all the way from 1963 up to modern day. There are 301 by our count.
Including Destiny of the Daleks. If you've not been listening for a few episodes, you'll wonder why that is ticked over from 300 to 301. It is not that you have missed a Jodie Whittaker story. It is that we messed up on our original codex.
Right. And now we have the correct count. And we're going to pick one of these stories at random. And how are we going to do that, Chris?
With the website I've just pulled up, random.org, which uses atmospheric noise, which you might consider to be a distress signal bouncing around the atmosphere. And awaiting a TARDIS to come sideways at time next to it, sidle up to it, and tune in to whatever randomness is being generated up there in the atmosphere, because computers are very bad at being random, and they just sort of use algorithms to pretend to be random. but we are truly random, as the Doctor would want us to be. So
Right on.
when Pete gives me the countdown, I'm going to hit generate between a number between 1 and 301, and we usually issue challenges to the randomizer. I think at this stage we should stop calling them challenges and start calling it begging, which is what it really is. We're just on bended knees before the randomizer, going, please end the spate of Classic Who. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, give us more Gene Marsh.
Ooh, wow! Oh, wow! You're playing with fire there. What if we get the Daleks master plan, dude?
Yeah,
I think we have to have another hiatus just to watch it.
Exactly. We'll be back in 2023, folks. If that does actually listen to it, but it won't, so we're okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say there were a lot of swords in this episode. Take us somewhere with no swords, because there's a lot of episodes with swords. Give us an episode with no swords in it whatsoever. Looking at you, oh God, what's that pirate episode?
The most recent one, Legend of the Sea Devils, or the Curse of the Black Spot.
Curse of the Black Spot. Looking at you, Curse of the Black Spot. I don't want to see you because there's too much swashbuckling.
I didn't know if you were going to go for an episode with swords, another episode with swords, another story with swords.
I couldn't decide at the last minute. I realized, you know what? I'm just, I've been seared by the, stage acting of the sword fights in Battlefield, and I don't want to see swords again. I want to see a good blaster, man. I'm like Han Solo. Be a good blaster. That's all I need.
Good blaster at your side, kid. All right, you want to give me the countdown? We'll see.
You got the countdown. It's happening in 4, 3, 2, 1.
Run, you clever boy.
140. It did not listen.
Oh, we're still in Old Who, but baby, it's the two Doctors.
Wow.
Boom.
Okay.
Boom. Multi-Doctor episode.
Our
which
second.
There are only 3 in Classic Who.
Yeah, it's our second overall, because we did the Day of the Doctor.
Right. Yes.
Have we done any other multi-Doctors, not counting regeneration episodes?
No, I don't think. No. Yeah, I don't think so. The only other one I can think of that isn't is Deep Breath.
Yes.
Which is kind of a regeneration episode, but
kind of multi-Doctor. Yeah, I get where you're going with that. But yeah, the two Doctors, interesting. We've mentioned it briefly. We mentioned it both in talking about Colin Baker and in talking about Patrick Troughton. It's weird, man. This one is weird, and I did watch it at the time. I don't
Speaking
remember
of a lot
that much
going
about
on,
it.
it's like
I remember weird ginger Patrick Troughton being a mad chef.
Yeah,
that's about
it's Colin Baker again, so that's good. It's kind of like one of the, I guess, so far in the Classic Who, the randomizer really likes 3s. It likes third Doctor, and it likes the 6th Doctor, because we've done a lot of Colin Baker now. I guess we've done some Davison too. Early on, it was into Davison, but this will be interesting.
Yeah, the 2nd and the 6th together at last. The pairing that no one was particularly excited to see actually didn't end up too bad.
Well, we'll see.
Anyway,
we'll give it. We'll tune in next week. We'll figure it out, man. All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Pull to Open. It's a podcast. Hey, if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, please do. There's probably a button somewhere in your app or in whatever app that you are going to be directed to by the web embed you're listening this to. If you're on YouTube, there's definitely a subscribe button. Go ahead and do that. And there's also something with the bell, I think, with the notifications. So turn all that on. And while you're at it, leave a review, leave a comment. Follow us on social media. We're at Pull to Open on TikTok, where we're active a lot. We're always uploading videos. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram at Pull to Open 63. We're going to see you next time for the two Doctors. I'm excited. Are you excited, Chris?
Yeah, very excited. And one last shout out, if you're listening to this podcast on a TARDIS console, turn up the lights. You'll hurt your eyes. Come on, Doctor. All right. We'll see you next time for the two Doctors. Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
folks.